Hi everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. My name is Joe Tilden, and I am the host of this program. Well, for those of you that are sports fans, this was a full weekend of NFL football, and some surprises. For example, in the American Conference, Baltimore was a heavy favorite to get to the Super Bowl, but they stumbled along the way. I think they were a little bit too overconfident. And they played the sixth-seeded Tennessee Titans. And Tennessee pretty much, with a very powerful ground game, pretty well controlled that and won it 28-12. So Tennessee moves on to the American Football Conference Championship game. And they're going to be playing the Kansas City Chiefs, the number 2 seed, in probably one of the wildest shootouts in not only in football postseason, but probably the whole NFL season. Houston, who's the number 4 seed, went up 24-0, and it looked like it was going to be a blowout. And Houston was going to pull off a big upset, knocking off number 2 KC. But second period, Kansas City came to life, turned it around, led 28-24 at the half. And of course, Kansas City went on to win it 51-31. So it was a shootout for Houston in the first quarter, putting 21 points on, then opening the second quarter with a field goal to lead 24-0. Second quarter, completely different type of ball game with Kansas City coming back to win it 28-24. Third quarter, well, it was 41-31. And KC 10 points in the last quarter to win it 51-31. So next week, the American Football Conference Championship will have the 6th seed Tennessee Titans going to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City and tackling the second place Kansas City Chiefs. In the National Football Conference, number 1 seed San Francisco came through and did in, I won't say in routing fashion, but in very, very handy fashion, in eliminating Minnesota 27-10. And their opponent will be the Green Bay Packers, the number 2 seed. The Packers held on and defeated Seattle 28-23 in the bitter cold at Lambeau Field up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And this time of year, trying to play football in that kind of weather, it has to handicap people a little bit. Football is cold, doesn't handle easy. But Green Bay, of course, they have a history of playing in sub-zero temperature. They managed to hold on, very fortunately, and won 28-23. So now they move to warmer climate. And next week they'll be playing San Francisco at Levi Stadium in San Jose, California. And the winners of next Sunday's games head to Miami, Florida to play the Super Bowl in the first week in February. So that is NFL football gradually coming to a close. Well, on the side of dealing with Mother Nature, a lot of problems with Mother Nature. First of all, there's Australia, which is burning. And thousands of people have had to evacuate their homes. They've lost their homes. Uncounted thousands of wild animals have been burned in the fire. There doesn't seem to be much chance of trying to extinguish it. But apparently the climate down there is very, very dry. They haven't had measurable rainfall in quite a time. And climate change has really hammered Australia and hammered it hard. And with everything burning up down there, they're in a emergency, tragic situation. The United States has sent some experienced firefighters down there who fought the numerous fires we've had in California and out in our western area to aid the firefighters in Australia and see if they can get a handle on this, get it under control. In our own country, we've been rather fortunate up here. We had beautiful weather. Yesterday, here in the first part of January, we've had almost spring-like weather. But the rest of the country has not been so fortunate. With heavy rain, with snow in the Midwest, cold temperatures, going down into Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, that area, the heavy band of tornadoes and hurricanes, and heavy rain. It's unbelievable the number of lives that these storms have taken. And very fortunately, they are working their way toward the Northeast and out into the Atlantic. And we are fortunate enough here in Vermont, and particularly right here in the Rutland area, central Vermont, that we haven't been hit with the hard storms coming up from the southeast, and the heavy ice storms that were supposed to hit stayed north of us. The biggest danger right now seems to be people are being on the alert for flooding. With the rain that has come, plus the warm temperatures have caused a lot of snow melt. It's very, very unusual, to look outside and see grass this time of January. Usually you're looking at the 4, 5, 6, 7 feet of snow. But at the present time, that's not the case. It's fairly mild weather for January, although when I came in to tape this show, it had just started to rain. So that could turn into freezing rain, unfortunately, which is very, very dangerous if you're driving and you have to go anywhere. And another surprise from Mother Nature, just north of the Canadian border, there was a mild earthquake this morning that surprised a lot of people. As the weatherman said on Channel 3, for a lot of people, it shook them enough to knock them out of bed. So that is not unusual, as we have had, it's not a habit up here, but we have had a number of rather mild earthquakes as the various, what they call tectonic plates that comprise our globe, as they come together and grind a little bit, and they shake up the Earth's surface. Fortunately, with a mild earthquake, it didn't do any major damage, as far as we know. Nobody was killed. It may have shaken up a few things and knocked a few things off the shelf and so forth. But so far, so good. A few years back, we had one in East Middlebury that we felt here in Rutland. And I remember that shaking things up, since we weren't used to earthquakes, or wonder, well, what's happening? Maybe there's something wrong with the furnace or whatever. But it was one of those very, very mild earthquakes. On the political scene, seems we're kind of heading for chaos. This week, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, turns over the articles of impeachment to the Senate. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who was a very close ally of President Trump, would like the Senate to shirk its constitutional duty. And he would like to push through a thing where they can say, well, we're not going to hold any trial. We're not going to do what we're supposed to do under the Constitution. Of course, as you know, Mitch and Trump are allies, or crooks together, however you want to look at it. And certainly McConnell's wife, who's the Secretary of Transportation, there's a little matter of her taking some $2 million in taxpayer money and sort of converting it to personal purposes that they're trying very, very hard to cover up and keep her out of jail. But this is a big, big year politically in the history of our country. We look over at the Middle East, and we're trying to figure out what's happening over there. Here the Iranians launched some rockets, or if not the Iranians, then their allies in Iraq and Syria, launch rockets against American-held positions over there. An American businessman gets killed, and the administration responds by killing Iran's top general, who happened to be in Iraq at the time, probably looking over Iran's satellite terrorists. He had been in Lebanon looking over Iran's terrorist offshoot over there, Hezbollah. And he was back in Iraq, probably talking to the various terrorist groups about possible attack on the U.S. Embassy. And of course, as you know, a group of Iraqis did attempt to surround our embassy in Baghdad and created a bit of a disturbance. And of course, after the general was killed, Iran responded by launching some rockets at U.S. bases in Iraq. And they accidentally, which they now admit, shot down an airliner just taking off from Tehran. Apparently, whoever was manning the missiles that they were firing into Iraq panicked. He probably saw on his radar that a flight was over Tehran, and so he launched a couple rockets. Boom. The airline is attacked, blown apart. I think 109 people lost their lives in that. Well, for a long time, of course, Iran denied that they did. They said, well, it must have been a malfunction on the plane. But as it turned out, it was a couple of direct hits from missiles fired from Iranian soil. The result is that Iran is in a bit of a political turmoil right now, as the citizens have suddenly demonstrated against their government. And there was an incident that was reported on the news yesterday where instead of burning the American flag, they were giving it a lot of respect. So turmoil continues over there. The parliament in Iraq has voted to ask the United States to pull out militarily. And at the present time, there are no plans to pull out. When we pulled out of northern Syria, of course, double-crossed our Kurdish allies. As soon as they pulled out, Turkish and Russian, Syrian troops moved in. And it was very, very interesting that just as soon as the U.S. pulls out, the Russians move in and take over the bases that we were occupying. And it's pretty obvious that this was all orchestrated far in advance. So the key was Trump's call to the Turkish President Erdogan, saying, okay, we're leaving, it's all yours. And he took advantage of it and moved on in. Well, you know, the Middle East, of course, has been in turmoil since way before the time of Christ. It probably began with when so-called civilization reached that part of the world. You know, the first dominant power were the Egyptians. And then in time, they were overcome by the Assyrians. And the Assyrians ruled for a long while. Then it was the Babylonians. And finally, it was the Persians, which is now Iran. But Iran at the time was Persia. The Jewish people, of course, had their own history of moving from an area probably which was maybe around Saudi Arabia, and for a while living in Egypt. And then as time wore on and they became less and less welcome in Egypt, they migrated into the Sinai, across the Red Sea and into the Sinai. Didn't have the Suez Canal in those days. And after approximately 40 years wandering around the Sinai, they moved into lands which were occupied by other peoples, primarily a group called the Canaanites. And, you know, the Israelis were able to defeat them and occupy that land. And in time, they themselves were overcome by the Assyrians, later on by the Babylonians. You have the Babylonian captivity, which lasted for a number of years when the Babylonians took the Jewish people out of their land, brought them into Babylon to be household servants and gardeners and all that sort of thing. Then you had Persia crushing Babylon, taking over that empire. And King Cyrus II of Persia restoring the Jews back to Jerusalem and what is now Israel. And of course it goes on with the Greek conquest, Alexander the Great, and then the Romans, and then finally the Ottoman Turks. And it's the whole area has been in constant conflict. And the idea that we're going to go over there, we're going to nation build and straighten them out, well, neighbor, it's just not going to happen. You know, these countries, some of them, you know, they've been broken up and reappropriated and realigned and all that. But overall, that area has been there for centuries. And as a nation, we're less than 300 years old. We're, as far as history goes, we're still an infant. And we're a very, very powerful infant, no question about that. But there's no way we're going to be able to go into the Middle East and say, all right, folks, this is it. Your fighting's over. Wars are over. We're going to have peace. It's just not going to happen. And the number of troops we have over there and the number of casualties we're taking, granted, they're not very many, but one casualty, even one casualty is one too many. It might be time to rethink how we're functioning over there. It might be time to pull our troops out of Afghanistan, pull them out of Iraq. If the Kurdish people need help, they're willing to host a military group from the United States, fine and dandy. But if the rest of them don't want us there, all right, we'll get out. We'll keep an eye on the place. And if you folks start getting in the area of launching missiles and rockets and all that sort of thing, we might come back with a few of our own. Saudi Arabia, well, we're protecting them. Not that they deserve it. They certainly don't. You have to remember that for the killing of one American businessman, which was bad, that we killed a top general in Iran's army. On the other hand, the Saudis took an American citizen, kidnapped him. Not only kidnapped him, they butchered him, cut him up. And we did nothing. We did nothing. So there's been a lot of controversy, people in Congress, not only from the Democratic side of the aisle, but also Republicans. They want to know why the administration elected to take out Iran's top general. What was the reasoning behind it? What was the motivation behind it? As the president says, he was a bad man. But then so is the president. Does that mean we should take him out too? Well, there you go. And coming back to our own country, this year, of course, we're getting closer and closer to seeing who's going to be the Democratic nominee, what the Democratic ticket is going to be. Another contender dropped out today. The junior senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, pulled out of the race. They used the idea where I'm suspending my campaign, which means I'm done, I'm out. And at the Democratic, and we can't call it a debate, it's more like a forum, there'll only be 6. A while back there were 20, but there are going to be 6. It's going to be Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Tom Steyer, the millionaire, and I can't think who the other one's going to be. The senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, or whatever her name is. She should drop out. She's not polling that well, but somehow or another, she thinks she has a chance. And the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. So there are going to be 6 of them. Right now, according to the latest polls, at least as far as Iowa's concerned, Bernie Sanders is up in front. Elizabeth Warren is second. And those two are starting to clash. Elizabeth Warren has taken a few shots at Bernie. And Bernie has fired back. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that one goes. Eventually, I think Bernie and Elizabeth are going to eliminate each other because they're both going after the same group of voters. And the thing I'm surprised about is the mayor of South Bend, that he's still hanging in there. I thought he would be one of the early ones out, but he seems to be hanging in there. And also a couple that aren't making that much noise, the former governor of Massachusetts and the former mayor of New York City are still in the running, although neither will be at the Democratic Forum on Tuesday the 14th. So it was 6 down, and I think probably this should be the last one because you've got your primary votes coming up in February, and the end of February, of course, is the big battle in New Hampshire, and then you go on to South Carolina and Nevada, and then Super Tuesday, and so forth and so on. Countdown continues. Well, of course, on the Republican side, no contest this time. Unfortunately, they will renominate the current incumbent, and hopefully the country has found that they made a big, big mistake in 2016. Again, when you look back on that, it becomes so very, very apparent that really the country didn't have too much choice. The American public didn't trust either one of them. And would Hillary have been a bad president? Well, she wouldn't have been one of our better ones, but I think she would have been better than Trump. But I don't think the country wanted to go through another 4 years of the Clinton's marital problems and so forth. You know, Bill has trouble behaving himself. And Hillary, well, Hillary likes to play the long-suffering wife, but I think she's done a little playing around on her own. So, but at least this time around, the Clintons aren't in the picture. And I think we can all be very, very thankful for that. So as we head on down, with 6 people in the forum, and we'll see how the primaries go. I think by April, we should have a pretty good idea who the Democratic nominee is going to be. And the next big question mark is who that nominee will pick for a running mate. The Democrats have to remember that the big agenda is to eliminate Donald Trump and to regain control, keep control of the House and regain control of the Senate. And if they're ever going to do that, 2020 is the time. And as I said before, I think the best choice for the Democrats is our former Vice President, Joe Biden. And I think he'll be a one-term president. And so it's very, very important whom he picks as a running mate. And it's just a matter of time before we have a female vice president. And it could be in 2024. Mr. Biden will only be there at his age. I mean, he'll be 82 in 2024, probably not up to another presidential campaign. You know, as you get older, there are a lot of things you like to do, but you realize physically you can't do them. And so it's very important who he picks as a running mate, because his running mate could be the Democratic candidate in 2024. And what he has got to do, he's got to pick the right one. And in my mind, for my money, the right one is the junior senator from California, Kamala Harris. She was in the presidential race for a while and dropped out, mainly because she didn't have enough money, or didn't have enough, wasn't generating enough revenue to continue in the race without going way into debt. And she very wisely dropped out, but I think she would be a great running mate for Joe Biden. I think it'd be a very, very powerful ticket. As I said before, I'm going to say it again. She would get the women's vote, which the Democrats need. She's African American, so she would get that vote. Many of them sat on their hands in 2016 after supporting Obama. In 2008 and 2012 and 2016, they couldn't buy into Hillary. They sat on their hands. But she will get out that vote. And because she's very fluent in Spanish, I think she would do very well in getting the Hispanic vote. I think the Hispanic people are very, very well aware of what's happening on our Mexican border and the way these people are being treated. And the idea of separating families and putting them in almost like concentration camps, although we don't use those words because, heavens, we don't do things like that. But realistically, that seems to be the way it's going. And, of course, the other big news, Nancy Pelosi has finally turned over, as I said before, the impeachment documents to the Senate. And they'll have a trial in the Senate. The House will have some representatives arguing for their point of view. I imagine one will be Representative Schiff from California. And he'll probably have maybe 3 or 4 other colleagues that will present the House's case to the Senate. And then the Senate will vote. Now, will they vote honestly? Well, if they voted honestly, Mr. Trump would be packing his bags. But you know, under Mitch McConnell, who's as dishonest and as crooked as they come, and a bunch of his other cronies, they're going to need 2/3 of the Senate to get a conviction, and they just aren't going to have it. There are 47 Democrats that will vote for it, and they need 20 Republicans to slide over to get those 67 votes that they need, and they're not going to have it. So Mr. Trump will not be convicted, but he has it on his record. He's the 3rd president to be impeached. And coming to campaign, how that's going to work remains to be seen. I think if there's any sense of justice in this country and any sense of what's right, the 2020 election should be a landslide in favor of Joe Biden if he's the candidate. I think he can win a sweeping election. But again, the Democrats have got to come together and say, hey, we can't be divided. Bernie Sanders the other night on television said quite well, whoever wins this election, or whoever wins the nomination, we're all going to come together and support him or her. Because the big goal, the big reason, is to change the leadership in this country. And we do that, we change the leadership in the world. And we'll turn this around. We'll end this landslide into chaos. We'll turn it around, and we'll start heading in the right direction. Because where we're going now, it's not doing us any good. It's not doing the rest of the world any good. And it's going to be just one big problem right after another. And we've got an incompetent nincompoop surrounded by a bunch of other idiots who don't know how to solve the world's problems, including our Secretary of State and some of his advisors. This administration is openly racist. So any African American could support this administration is beyond me. Hopefully they will realize that, and I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. And even some African Americans who are Republican realize that a change has to be made. And it's time to put the country ahead of party and realize where we're going. And one last thing, in Montpelier last week, Governor Scott's State of the State address, as you know, he was interrupted by a group of demonstrators. And I thought he handled it very well. He started his speech, then he stopped, and he let them have their say. And a couple of times he tried to interrupt them and said, hey, I have listened to you, I hear you, now you listen to me. But they weren't in any mood to listen to him. And the result was that the state police and the security at the State House had to remove them. And I thought they did it in a very, very good manner. They issued them no trespass notices. And only one idiot decided to create a disruption, and he will be appearing in court, I believe, a disturbing the peace citation. But also today, the lieutenant governor made it official that he is running for governor. So with that, we wish you all a very good week. May Almighty God in His infinite wisdom continue to bless these United States of America. God bless America. God love you. We'll see you all next week.